Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're opening a case file on a story where fear itself became a kind of contagion, where a whole neighborhood's anxiety seemed to manifest into a real-world horror story for one family. This is the haunting of Chota Govindpur.
You know, that one single sentence from an eyewitness, it really tells you everything. This isn't just about it getting dark outside. It's about an entire community holding its collective breath. An unspoken agreement to just lock the doors, shut out the world, which, as we're about to see, only ended up locking the horror inside. To really get what happened in Chota Govindpur back in 1998, you first have to understand the place itself. This wasn't just a location on a map. It was, well, a perfect storm of isolation and unease. A community that was already living on a knife's edge long before the first real shadows started to creep in. I mean, just picture this. You've got a community that's physically cut off from the main city. Power is a total luxury, sometimes gone for 2 weeks at a time, plunging everything into darkness. The roads are barely there, the infrastructure is fragile, and on top of all that, almost half the land is just empty. Vacant plots that bake a sense of unease right into the landscape. This mix of being so isolated and a social dynamic where a rumor could just catch fire, well, it created the perfect breeding ground for what was about to happen. The events that would end up shaking this entire community to its core, they didn't start with some big, loud, dramatic event. No, they started quietly, with whispers, with sideways glances, and it was all aimed at one single reclusive family. So this story starts to take hold that a woman in a quiet family was practicing dark arts. And when her husband died pretty unexpectedly, that rumor mill just went into overdrive. Suddenly, all that suspicion fell onto her daughter, Rita, whose behavior started to become more and more erratic. Every single evening, the entire neighborhood basically became this unwilling audience to a really disturbing performance. Rita's strange rooftop ritual, it was like this public spectacle of some kind of private torment. And for the people watching, this wasn't just odd behavior. No, it was confirmation of their darkest fears. And that house, it became a place to be afraid of.
And then tragedy struck. A boy was hit by a train, another took his own life, a third drowned. 3 sudden, tragic deaths, all within 2 weeks. In that thick, soupy atmosphere of suspicion, the community, they connected the dots. A deep, chilling fear just settled over everything, and the once lively streets fell completely silent after dark.
So it was in this supercharged climate of fear and grief that the phenomenon, whatever it was, it shifted its focus. It moved from the edges of the neighborhood right into the home of our eyewitness, a young man named Nishant. It all started pretty subtly. Nishant's sister, who had always been so full of life, just started to fade. It was gradual at first, not wanting to eat, crying for no reason, but her decline started getting faster and faster. The family, these were educated people. They turned to medicine, but the doctors had no answers. They were just watching her slip away, and they were completely powerless to stop it. And then came the moment that just completely shattered their reality. They hear this strange man's voice, and her father goes to investigate. He finds his daughter sitting in this prayer-like posture, but when he calls her name, she turns, and her eyes are a shocking, solid white. A deep, male voice erupts out of her, cursing her own father in perfect Arabic. This wasn't an illness anymore. This was an invasion. From that point on, the family's life was just turned upside down. Their home wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a battleground. They were totally isolated, surrounded by a fear their neighbors couldn't even begin to understand. And they started this desperate search for a solution. Their search for help just turned into this terrifying parade of failed hopes. An exorcist named Raju was the first to face whatever this thing was. He was reportedly thrown violently across the roof and just fled in absolute terror. Others tried to intervene, but they all failed. The entity seemed to know their every move, even stopping them from getting their daughter to a spiritual healer. With every single failed attempt, their hope just withered away, replaced by this chilling feeling that they were trapped. And look, the activity wasn't just confined to their sister. It started to bleed into the very fabric of their home. Pans of food would go flying out of the kitchen. Strange little packets of clothes and vermilion would just appear on windowsills. This phantom smell of perfume would drift through the rooms. And maybe the most disturbing thing, the entity started mimicking their mother's voice, trying to lure them, to trick them. It was a campaign of constant,
unnerving psychological torment.
What's so wild about this is how intelligent it all was. This wasn't just random, chaotic haunting. It was a calculated campaign of psychological torture. The entity showed this cruel cleverness, turning the family's attempts to protect their daughter into instruments of her pain. It literally used their love as a weapon, forcing them to choose between their faith and their daughter's well-being. This was a battle for their home, yes, but also for their minds.
After more than a year of living under this constant siege, the family, just completely exhausted and desperate, they made one last, final attempt to reclaim their lives and to reclaim their daughter. They finally get referred to this powerful spiritual man, a Siddha Purusha, and what he tells them is just a total gut punch. The cleric, Tazi Baba, the one person who had offered them even temporary relief, he was a con artist. He hadn't removed the entity, he had planted another one in their home. He created this cycle of torment and false cures just to keep extorting money from them. Their one shred of hope had been nothing but a cruel, carefully crafted illusion.
So the Siddha Purusha, he gives them a path forward, a final, desperate plan. The ritual was incredibly precise. First, they had to expose the fraud by finding and removing all the cursed objects the cleric had planted. Then, a whole series of complex cleansing rites to purify the house itself. The final step was to somehow bind all the entities into a single clay pot and cast it into a canal, severing the connection for good. It was their absolute last gamble.
But the entities, they did not go quietly. As the Siddha Purusha and Nishant's father were taking that pot to the canal, the spirits launched one final, violent assault. The holy man's body was reportedly bent sideways by some invisible force, but he held on, he chanted his mantras, and with one last great effort, he threw the pot into the water, and the curse was broken. And just like that, the house fell silent. The entities were gone. But for the family, the ordeal left wounds that wouldn't be so easily cleansed. The psychological scars, they remained. You see, the silence in the house was a relief, but it couldn't erase the memories. The family had won the battle, but the war had left them deeply scarred. That house was no longer a home. It was a monument to all their suffering. So in 2001, they just walked away from the house their father had built. A final heartbreaking act just to try and save themselves.
26 years passed before Nishant, the boy who had seen it all, went back to that neighborhood for the very first time. Decades had passed, the neighborhood had changed completely, but for Nishant, that house, it was a time machine back to the worst moments of his life. A single glance was all it took to reopen all those old wounds. And that, right there, is the true nature of a haunting. It's not about the spirits that linger in a place. It's about the memories that we can never, ever escape. And it leaves you with this question that just kind of lingers long after a story like this ends. It makes you wonder, maybe the most terrifying hauntings aren't about the ghosts that visit us from the outside, but about the ones that take up residence inside our own minds.